Aryan's stomach rolls and he squeezes his eyes shut, trying to will away the memory of that winter day where everything seemed to have fallen apart between him and his family. The new year and the beginning of his work in his newly promoted position had barely begun. His family had all gathered to commemorate his promotion, and seeing as advancing in the tech world was a topic of great pride, there was an air of happiness and celebration. Finally, he had thought he'd made them proud. Aryan recalls bitterly how naive it had been to think his family would celebrate him coming out. The memory had been festering in the back of his head for almost a year, constantly itching until it grasped hold of him. But no matter how much he hated thinking about it, he could never will himself to end the playback once it started. Still, he remembers how he had shaken his leg, chewed the inside of his lip until he finally looked up and cleared his throat. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, he wavered, is that I'm gay. He had exhaled and lifted his head. His eyes had scanned the faces of his loved ones and looked for something to grasp onto. He waited for softened looks of surprise or even outright anger, something he could have reacted to, but instead he had watched as his parents' expressions slowly hardened and they shared a look. The same look he got when he had failed to get elected as a student body president, when he hadn't been named valedictorian, when he had chosen to go to UC, and suddenly it had been thrown his way because of who he was. His throat had dried out and his heart had thumped, and suddenly his head was hurting with the effort to hold back his tears. "Ari, tu ye sab kyun kar rahe ho?" his mom had asked. "Why are you doing all this?" she questioned in Hindi. His parents continued to speak, their words piercing his resolve but barely sinking in. He still remembered how he had sat through what had felt like the lectures he used to get as a child, the familiar feeling of his legs shaking, hands balled into fists as he endured the criticism. He had sat, head downturned until they stopped speaking long enough for him to snap his head to the side and pull himself away from the moment, only stopping to throw down some cash. He hated himself for crying, for running out of the restaurant like a coward, hanging his head in shame. He had lingered just a few seconds, had waited for the cries of "Wait!" or "I'm sorry" as he fled, but they never came. The memory of his blurred vision and the salty taste lingered on his lips as he sat up in his bed, running a hand through his dark, messy curls. His teeth gnaw at the skin behind his lips. His head hurts and his brain feels empty except for the one memory rattling around. He staggers up and into the shower, trying to distract himself with something else. He's quick and efficient now, showering quickly before occupying himself with getting dressed. He pulls out countless shirts and trousers, spending more time than necessary perfectly tussling his hair before grabbing his shoes in his backpack and slamming the door of his flat shut. He hurries into the lift, sending back the smiles that float his way with slight reflections that barely skirt the edges of his eyes. His lips drop as soon as the faces pass. He drives down to work, blasting music in his BMW M3, legs shaking to the rhythm. Sometime later, he is standing steadily on a chair in a conference room, watch bumping against the wall as he scrawls on the expanse of the whiteboard extending across the plane. He braces himself on his bare forearms, shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows and dusted with black from where the whiteboard marker has rubbed away. His brows are furrowed slightly and his teeth are biting into his bottom lip as the marker drags across the surface. He stops suddenly when the door swings shut and the sound of light conversation reaches his ears. He huffs and his right arm falls to his side as he leans on his left. He whips his head over his shoulder, getting ready to give the distraction that just walked in the door a piece of his mind, but his expression changes, softening slightly before retaining some of its previous sharpness. The duo that just entered stills their conversation, coming to a stop in front of Aryan. Aryan hurries to hop off the stool as he notices an unfamiliar person standing next to a familiar one. His spine straightens and he frantically brushes off his sleeves the best he can, trying to tame his freshly mussed hair. His eyes meet Scott's and his lips twitch up slightly. He clears his throat. "Hey, Scott," he says, nodding slightly towards his companion. He surveys her quickly. He's never seen her before, but she stands comfortably in the room. "Sup," Scott replies. His eyes twinkle and his eyebrows and lips quirk up amusedly. "I see you got started without us." Aryan quirks an eyebrow. "Well, your constant tardiness was definitely a factor in the decision," Aryan counters. Immediately he clears his throat, eyes flicking to the ground. Nonetheless, he timidly raises an eyebrow and darts his gaze towards Scott's companion, silently inquiring from him. "Oh, my apologies for that," the woman says, laughing. She steps forward, extending a well-manicured hand towards Aryan. "I'm Kit. I'm on the engineering side of the project." Aryan reaches forward, reciprocating her firm handshake. "Aryan, I'm on the design and UX side, though I'm sure you know that by now, he says politely. He stands stiffly at attention, lips pressed together in a tight smile, eyes darting between her face and the floor before locking with Scott's. All right, now that everyone's acquainted, let's get started, Scott interjects. Aryan lets go of a breath and seats himself on the chair he was previously standing on. Aryan eases into the meeting, eyes glancing to the others' faces for reassurance. His leg bounces quickly as he speaks, moving his hands to further explain his thoughts. As the minutes pass by and he's occupied with the task of simultaneously thinking, talking, listening, reading, and writing, his joints loosen and he leans back casually in his chair, one ankle resting on the opposite knee. By the time the meeting is wrapped up, the summer sun is darkening like caramel and a light breeze whips around the greenery. Somehow, Aryan has been pushed along with the momentum of the day, and he and Scott have been convinced to go for Friday evening drinks with Kit. After Kit leaves the conference room, promising to meet them at a popular bar, Scott hangs back with Aryan, slinging his backpack over his shoulder as he waits for Aryan to leave. They leave together, eyes twinkling just a few shades brighter. He arrives at the 25 Luskin Soma, and the sky is already rapidly darkening. It's familiar enough, perhaps on the more expensive side, but it's neutral territory. Aryan looks down at his attire, at his Colohan shoes, trousers, his slightly rumpled sleeves, and a bit more tousled than normal hair, and slowly makes his way in, immediately scanning the room for familiar faces. His posture straightens as he walks in the door and maneuvers through groups of people, their faces muted by the dimly lit room. He finds Kit and Scott already by the bar, each nursing a drink. "Hey, Aryan," Kit says. She leans back in her chair, exuding comfort and confidence. She smiles, and a smile slaps onto his face as well. Scott pulls out a chair for him to sit, and he relaxes slightly, shielded from others by the company of an acquaintance and a friend. Their conversation soon picks up from the momentum left over from the meeting, but topics shift, leaning closer to more personal matters. Aryan learns that Kit has a German shepherd named Watson whom he politely insists he must meet sometime, and Kit learns that Scott was an avid soccer player in his youth. It's all fun, but Aryan is just a little relieved that the talking stays far away from himself. They're talking about Scott's senior prom when he says, "I think I would have been late if I hadn't convinced my parents to stop taking pictures." Kit laughs and Aryan chuckles slightly. Scott's told this story so many times that Aryan started going through it in his head while he spoke. He found a hilarious honesty, and the familiarity was cozy among the somewhat foreign confidence of the night. The chuckles die down and warmth fills the air. Kit sighs happily. "Parents can be crazy, but you gotta love 'em," she says. It's a fairly simple statement, one that needn't bring up conversation about Aryan's parents or Aryan's past, but it's enough to light a fire in Aryan's mind about how untruthful that statement is. His eyes widen and he takes in a sharp breath. He tries to nod, relaxes his expression, but Kit's smile flickers out like a dying candle as she looks between the two faces. "I'm sorry, did I do something wrong?" she asks. "Kit, it's all right. It's just a little bit of a difficult subject," Scott says. He turns to his facing Kit, his back towards Aryan, trying to explain what just happened. He tries to ease the situation, be the peacemaker, but that sets Aryan off. Suddenly, he's stomping out to the restroom, head hurting again. He slams the door shut and quickly locks it. His jaw is clenched and his eyes are blinking almost constantly, trying to brush away the tears threatening to spill out of his eyes. And by the time he returns, only Scott remains. Now the sky is darkened completely and they sit side by side. People around them bustle, but they sit quietly. "You alright?" Scott asks. "I know it's been a busy day with the meeting and all. Sorry for being late to the meeting." He doesn't directly mention Kit or what just happened. "It's all good. I'm just not used to you being late because you're ditching me for someone else," he says. He laughs. It's meant to be a joke, but it comes out dry, almost lifeless. He's not quite sure why. Maybe it was the ordeal with Kit, or maybe it was just a slight twinge of rejection that bloomed in his chest when Scott walked into the conference room earlier in the day. He seemed so comfortable, at ease, as he had rushed to get everything in order. But he looks up and he sees that Scott's eyes have gone stormy and his forehead has crinkled slightly. "Ditching you! Ari, do you hear yourself?" Scott raises his voice. "I was working, for God's sake. I know that was tough," Kit asking you that. "Hell, I know the past 5 months have been rough. But all you do is mope around and worry about what your parents and everyone else thinks of you. And honestly, it's getting a bit tiring." He takes a deep breath and sweeps his hand through his hair. His voice drops. "I'm not taking their side, but have you even talked to them, Ari? Tried to find a solution?" His voice is softer, but Aryan's looking away now, lips puckered. He tries to look away, show Scott that what he's saying is not reaching him. He twiddles with his phone, scrolling through his chats, pulling up emails, anything that'll help his mind dull the importance of the words he just heard. It's difficult, ignoring an unsolved problem, leaving strings untied, but he's managed to do it for 5 months. He can manage it for more. But suddenly his eyes snap up. He hears Scott laugh. It's cold and rough and seems out of place. Wow, Scott laughs. I can't... He throws his hands up and lets them fall to his sides. You know what? Never mind. I'm sorry, all right? You have fun alone. He drains his cup, runs his hand through his hair once more before turning and disappearing into the throng of people, leaving Aryan sitting with his thoughts clattering around his head again. He had gotten his apology. He had sat through it, much like a scolding. It hadn't been warm, it hadn't been relieving. It had been spit at him like acid, it had burned like fire. He runs out, barely remembering the cash this time as he flees. The next morning he wakes up to puffy eyes and disheveled hair. His head throbs slightly as he thinks about yesterday's events. He had been left alone again. The first time, no matter how he had felt, his actions had protected him, gotten himself out of a toxic situation. But the issue hadn't been cleaned up, and the toxicity had lingered. And the second time, he had tipped a volatile situation into dangerous territory. He thought about what Scott had said to him about his lack of attention, his unwillingness to take a step to clean up the mess. He rubs a hand across his face as he picks up his phone and scrolls through his texts. His fingers shake as he clicks on one. The date is January 8, 2016. The date on his phone is currently June 29, 2016. His fingers click on the software keyboard, deleting the letter several times before he finally types the last period. His fingers linger over the arrow before he takes a breath and clicks send. He places his phone on his bedside table and hurries into the shower. When he returns, he picks up his phone and runs a wet hand through his hair. His chest heaves as he relaxes into the bed, sitting completely still. On his phone, written out in Hindi, it says, "Of course, beta, humko baat karni chahiye." In English, it says, "Of course, my son, let's talk."